We're learning Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah, Perek Hey, Halacha Chof. The Rambam says, Mutter lo seis tavlin, you're allowed to put in spices, v'ashumshumin, or sesame seeds, v'ketzach. We'll go down below to the Peirush Rambam, where it says you can place tavlin, shumshumin, and ketzach, and others like it, into the dough. Meaning, you don't have to worry about chometz. The Magen Mishnah cites Tosefta. And Agos Maimonides adds from Menachos 23b. Matzah shetivlo beketzach. Matzah that was made tastier with ketzach, or b'shumshumin, with sesame seeds, b'chol mini tavlin, any type of spice, is kshero. It's kosher. El shenichas matzah metuvelas. It's called a matzah metuvelas. In the Tosefta, Mosdos Perek Beis Al Yud Gimel, it's written you can be yoytze b'matzah which is spiced on Pesach. So not only that, there's no question about chometz, and it's called matzah shmura, b'leila seder. Now lechem oini, furthermore, it's mutter to make a dough with water and oil or honey and milk. The Magen Mishnah explains that this is like the Rambam is passing like the Riv, that Halacha is like Rabbi Kiva on Psochim 36a, that it's mutter to make a dough with wine, shemen, udvash, even though there is in the dough water that does not quickly become chometz. More so than Isa that was made only from water, or to cover it with water, and with these items. And there's no question that you can smooth over the dough and you don't worry about chometz. Why? If you can make the dough to begin with juice of fruits and water, and you're not afraid of chometz that will happen quicker than it would when it would only be with water. Therefore, when he mixes dough with water and he only covers it with Peirush, with juice from fruits, certainly you don't have to worry about chometz. The Rambam continues, the first day, one is permitted only to make dough and to cover it with water alone, not because of the issur of chometz, but rather so that it should be called lechem oini. The first day it has to be a zikaron lechem oini, that should be made from flour with water alone, without any fruit juice, both at the time of dough, making the dough, and also the time that you cover the dough. But when you smooth over the dough with something else, it's not because of chometz, only because it should be called lechem oini. We're talking about the kazayas matzah. The rest of the meal you can eat other matzah, and only the first kazayas you need to have a remembrance, a commemoration of the lechem oini, because it says in the pasuk in Devarim 16, 3 lechem oini. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, he said to his sons, from the first day and further, give me matzah that was made with milk, but for the first day he wanted it should be only with water. And Rashi explains here, Rishon, it doesn't mean the whole day, it means only the night of the Seder, when you have to keep the mitzvah of Hilchos Matzah. The Magen Mishnah says, so it would seem from the Rambam, that matzah that was made from fruit juice, yoytze achilas matzah Pesach, but you don't do it with wine or oil or dvash, or cholav, milk, because lechem oini. So you see, we're talking about matzah that you have to fulfill the obligation of poor man's bread and not rich bread. Furthermore, he brings to the Yerushalmi Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Kezai she'odam yoytze b'Pesach. The kezai that a person eats on Pesach, it should not be with it mashkin. The Rae disagrees. He writes, Zeh al divrei Rav. This is according to the Rif. Sheseimach al divrei Rabbi Akiva she'omar losh lishsi. And that's what Rabbi Akiva said, that you can mix the dough. But Rabbi Yeshua, according to Rabbi Yeshua, Isa b'yayim v'shem advash v'lo yom v'lo dova. That there's no chash of chimutz. Furthermore, the Rae brings, and from the words of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who said that from the first day on, what you should mix me with milk. There's no worry about making more chometz quicker because of the milk added. The Rae says, this is only referring to people who were capable and could do it swiftly, that they did it quickly. But for every person to allow them to do it, we don't do it. And that's the rule according to the Rae, that you would not be allowed to do it the rest of Pesach for an ordinary person. There in the sugya, we find that everyone agrees you don't make dough out of water that's warm. The Gemara cites Beis Shammai say you can't make a thick matzah on Pesach. They still permit it. Havuna says we're talking about the width of no more than a width of a tefach, 4 finger breadths, like the lecha aponim, which is called a tefach because there's no face that's less than a tefach. That's why it's called lecha aponim. It's not made from chometz. Lecha aponim is matzah. The Gemara asks a question: if you say it by his reason, meaning by kehanim who eat lecha aponim and are considered capable and efficient, yemu b'she'enam, this reason is the same will apply for those that are not swift, because lecha aponim the kehanim did, that was the reason. But adam, a person who bakes matzah, a usual person is not efficient, and we're afraid that if the matzah, the bread, is width of a tefach, it will become chometz. The Lecha Mishnah argues that according to the Rae, the Gemara is talking about by people that are not efficient. If that's the case, why do they mention only warm water? It should be also to do it as well in wine or with honey. And he answers its reason, the efficient people that mentioned Torah are the kehanim, but everyone else is not considered as reason efficient, and he will not be able to do it with warm water. It shouldn't become chometz. However, shemen yain and dvash, people know, like Rabbi Akiva knew how to do it, and he wasn't a kohen, and therefore the Rae says you don't do it with warm water, even though by wine, oil, and dvash, a Yisrael could possibly do it like Rabbi Akiva, and they didn't say anything against Rabbi Akiva. Regarding the Rae's Hasoga, disagreeing with the Rambam, the Maggid Mishnah writes, and I say, we cannot make edicts on our own thoughts after the Doros of the Goinim. And Lecha Mishnah means that Divrei Ravid is a Gzeiro we don't find. And therefore, even though the Rif Paskins, it's okay, the Rambam Paskins like the Rif, and the Ravid is afraid it's a new Gzeira. The Lecha Mishnah says that even though, according to the Ravid, Rabbi Akiva does not disagree on the Chachamim, that they will say it should be done right away, it has to be done swiftly, and that not 18 minutes, and that would seem to be the language of the Brisa. That he doesn't agree because Amar Rabbi Akiva, it says Amar Rabbi Akiva. It doesn't say Rabbi Akiva Oimer, which should say he disagrees. In the order of the statement, if he says Rabbi Akiva Oimer, it's a statement of his own rather than in addition to before. Also in the Brisa, it's talking by his reason. Still, it doesn't prove anything because Rabbi Akiva is disagreeing with Chachamim, because according to Chachamim, its reason cannot mix flour lachatchila with warm water, and according to Rabbi Akiva, they can do so to begin with. Because if otherwise, how can he say that everyone agrees that with warm water you cannot do it, and b'shem and dvash, they are only disagreeing with regard to whether you can mix it with oil and honey and be able to make it swiftly, but with warm water you can't do it unless you're kahanim. And if the intent is to tell us that when you do it with warm water it's mutter, that's what they want to tell us, that it's mutter, you should have said you can do it with warm water, not that you cannot make dough with warm water. The Lechem Mishnah attempts to find a source in the Gemara for the Ravid, because he feels you can't do it after the time of the Goinim, and he pushes them off, and therefore it would seem we remain with the Divrei HaMagid Mishnah that we have no power to enact new edicts after the generation of the Goinim. Rabbi Manoach cites a raya that I goes Maimonides from the din that if you put it into the Menachos Ketzach, it's kosher. It's called Matzah Mutuvelas. This we find in Menachos, which has a deal with the Menachos that are brought on the Mizbeach, and he has, we're talking about Kadam's reason. How can you teach it from Kahanim for everyone? Furthermore, he asks a question. There it says specifically that bechamin in hot water, and here by Pesach it says even the warm water, certainly not with spices, like Lechem Mishnah. We can't learn from Menachos because it's not through Kahanim's reason. At the end, Rabbi Manoach brings the Tosefta, that the Magid Mishnah brought as the source of the Rambam, and therefore it's understood why the Magid Mishnah only brought the Tosefta, not the Gemara, because there they're talking about reason. And he adds further, the Yerushalmi, it says you fulfill your obligation with matzah which has spices. He asks from Yerushalmi, it would seem even matzah of mitzvah yoytze if you put into it spices. And a key of matzah's mitzvah has to be lechem oini, a poor man's bread which doesn't have spices. And the Rambam says mutar lo seisat tavlin, you can put in tavlin, would seem that you don't have to worry about the Chometz, but not regarding the night of the Seder. The Rambam is referring to the rest of the other days of Pesach. Because he says in the first day you should only use water and flour. Rabbi Manoach tries to explain to those who disagree with the Rambam, they explain to Yerushalmi the matzah that was spiced after it was baked. And see, at the time of baking, it wasn't matzah shiur, it wasn't a rich man's bread. That we don't care that afterwards he added spices to it. But he says that doesn't seem to be the understanding of the Yerushalmi. Now, can you put salt in the dough? Furthermore, Rabbi Manoach points out that the Rambam doesn't mention whether you can put salt into the dough, that you make matzah's mitzvah. When the Rambam says mutter to put in tavlin, he does not intend melach, because melach, salt, is not called a spice. And he brings proof from a Gemara, which we don't have, that in the Gemara they specify melach, heviu melach, bring melach, heviu tavlin, bring spices, as proof that melach is something by itself and is not included in spices. The minig oilam is not to put salt in a dough that you bake from it matzah, because in Vo Basra it says you distance fertilizer and salt from a wall, and they're talking about that salt causes heat, and therefore that heat will destroy the wall. Therefore, it's correct the minig not to put melach in the dough, because it causes it to become chometz quickly from the heat generated by the salt. There's another proof from the Gemara in Shabbos 79a that oyer, when they make skins or parchment, and you take it off from the animal, you want to work it, you do it with salt. And there's a different type of leather that they make, which is called matzah. Why is it called matzah? Because they don't put in salt. So you see that whenever it's called matzah, it has no salt in it. At the end, Rabbi Manoach proves you can put melach in an isa from sochim. Mishcho milcho shori, that putting in oil and salt is permitted. So it would seem there's the melech. There's no question of making it more chometz. It's like May Peirush, and he adds, somebody wants to be noyeg isu v'matzah's mitzvah. Someone who wants to be noyeg a mitzvah should not add melech, and it's okay. But the rest of the Pesach, you can do it, and there's no reason to even think it'll make it chometz. Just that Klal Yisrael, the minig is not to put in salt in any of the matzah, and he writes, I do not want to be the one to permit it, because we find the Yerushalmi and Psochim Perek Dal Halacha Aleph that those things which are mutter and others say it's also, it's forbidden for you to tell them that they can go ahead and do it. And he adds further that he happened to find after 10 years of Chuvas Aravid that only the matzah's mitzvah that there was a minig not to put in melech, but other matzahs they did. But today nobody puts matzah in melech in matzah at all. Now goes Maimonides. It says, Rabbi Shimon Levi said to his children, in the first day, do not put in milk. The Rambam was medagdik that matzah you can use milk, except for the first day. What's the difference between, and what's the difference? And he says even limloach you can put in salt, because what's the difference whether you put in salt or milk or honey? And others say it's also, why? That salt is worse than, because salt has its own heat, as we said before. It would be like using warm water. That the klal, the general rule is with things which are forbidden and permitted, that something that fell into salt and stayed there is considered as having been cooked there. So we see that melech, salt, has a ability to cause heat and friction. Halacha l'maaseh, the Shulchan Aruch paskins, we're noyeg not to put melech in matzah, and it's correct. The Ramah adds, even b'diavad, it's also. And the Mishnah Berurah explains, because there's those who say that melech, salt, causes the dough to become chometz, and he adds furthermore, only before you bake it. After you bake it, there's no isur, and you can cover the bnei matzah after you bake it, even with salt water, and put it back into the tanur like you do in Chol HaMoed. Still, for matzah's mitzvah, one should be careful not to even smooth it over with salt water. And he cites that Achronim, if you put in a little bit of salt and he baked it immediately, it's not also, because we have no source to say it becomes chometz. The Bia Halacha explains that what we brought from the Chaverim of the Rashbam, that melech is like Roseach, is only when he puts a lot of melech, and it can't be eaten because it's so salty. But a little bit of melech that does not, which just gives it taste, does not cause it to become hot. So it would seem to the Machaba. He says it's nochan adova, only lachatchila, but b'diavad it's permitted. But the Ramah says even b'diavad, because he goes according to the opinion, he recites the Tur, that May Melech is May Peirush. And the Ramah writes in the Darkei Moshe, that's the sefer that he wrote before he wrote the Mappa on the Shulchan Aruch. May Peirush with water, hurry to cause things to become chometz if you do not bake it right away. Which melech, which salt is called May Peirush? The Ramah explains that the Torah is talking with melech that you dig up from the ground, which is called steinsalz. But melech that you make from evaporating salt water, and you dry it in the sun, you only have the melech, and as it didn't like water itself, and you can't, and it's not forbidden to make dough with it, b'diavad, not to begin with. But if you put a lot of melech, you have to worry that the melech is like heating. In our times, we know that we don't place melech, even in an iso that from which you make the dough, even the rest of the days of Pesach, not only the first night. Machaba continues, if you made the matzah with ketzach and shumshim and sesame seeds and other types of spices, it's kosher, because it has a tam of matzah. And the Mishnah Berurah explains, Ketzach is called Kimmel. He's medayek that the Machava is of the opinion that you yoytze the shiur matzah in the first night because it's not called matzah ashira, and therefore you can't eat it erev Pesach, because the whole idea you're not supposed to eat matzah erev Pesach, because any matzah that you can be yotze at night, it's also to eat it erev Pesach. He cites further the Yesh Omer, if you did place spices, it's only kosher the rest of Pesach because it's called matzah ashira. That you're not yotze in Chutz La'aretz in the first 2 nights, and he says one should be more stringent and not use them. The Mechaber continues, still one should not put spice because it causes the Isa to become hot, and it could become Chometz. The Rambam says, Upilpulin, even b'diavad it's also. So too, if sid, which is lime, fell into it, which causes also heat, they can cause the dough to become chometz. The Mishnah Berurah continues, even a little bit of pepper, even a little bit of sid, it's also. Only when it was rolled with it. But if it fell on the Isur, you just take it off and it's mutter. What the Rambam says also, the Mishnah Berurah explains, is also ba'achila, but there's no Isur hano. Meaning usually chometz is also ba'ano, but here it's only that we're afraid. But there's no it's not chometz. He adds zingbul, which is ginger is like pilpulin, like pepper. The evidence also, and the same thing would be to cloves, v'karchum. And turmeric. Turmeric. He brings further. Those who say that all types of spices except for pepper and sid is mutar b'diavad, even to eat. But the Rambam writes, sid, Mishnah Berurah explains that it's still dry, it's wet, but if it fell off from a wall after they put on the wall and it became dried and hard like a stone, it won't make it also.